Courteous tart, you are dismissed from your position as one of the 4 kings. The council room was filled with numerous leaders of demonkind, and the central figure, the newly appointed demon emperor, had just uttered those words. As for the subject that he was speaking to, it was a man who had something of a careless air about him. He wore dark-rimmed glasses and had long hair that fell over much of his face. And judging by his calm voice and disposition, he was likely near 40. He was so tall that many had to look up to see his face. There was also thickness to his frame, and a degree of nobility. And yet there was still something phony about all of it. As the cold stares pierced into him, the man called Courtiers answered in an apologetic voice. Surely something can be done? Not at all. The demon emperor shouted down at him without a moment of thought as Courtiers looked up shyly. His chilling features had all the beauty of a statue of a goddess, and yet they now twisted. His fingers tapped on the table as he continued. In the first place, I cannot understand why you were ever one of the 4 kings. What the hell was my predecessor thinking when you were appointed a leader of demons? At these words, the other officials nodded approvingly. Such a lack of spirit is not fitting for a demon, and yet you can't seem to stop talking to the court ladies. On top of that, you have achieved absolutely nothing in the last battle against the hero. And worst of all, your magic attribute is Flower Field. After these last words, Courtiers looked annoyed and covered his ears. In this world, all beings were born with an attribute. In general, there was earth, water, fire, and wind. But rarely, in fact, you could count the instances throughout history on one hand. Were there exceptions? And Courtiers was one of them. Yes, Courtiers was the only demon, no, the only one in this entire world who had the Flower Field attribute. But worse, no one knew what magic that attribute even allowed him to perform. Well, it was more accurate to say that no one cared to know. After all, demons were a warrior tribe, and not being seen as a threat made you a target for ridicule. So, you can't even argue against that. It makes my blood boil, just thinking about how such an incompetent and weak man has been using such an esteemed office to leech off of us. No, I worked hard to achieve things outside of combat. I don't think I've been a leech. However, no one was interested in any of that. Courtiers was aware of this, and so he didn't specify anything, nor did anyone ask him to. Bastard! You must enjoy seeing me angry! The demon emperor interrupted him with a loud slap on the table. A large crack appeared in the heavy wooden surface. However, that did little to calm him down. And so he stood up noisily and gathered a swirl of dark magic at the tip of his fingers as he looked at Courtiers. Your Majesty, I beg of you to reconsider. It is true that I don't possess the power that ye would be proud of. However, I have my role. Have you forgotten your father's words that I am never to be let go? Courtiers made his case in a rather admonishing tone. There was a sharp light in his eyes, but a sadness as well. Silence! I do not want to look at your face for another second. I curse you! You will be teleported out of this country. I shall banish you to live in the world of humans. Should you ever try to return to us, my curse will surely cause death to be visited upon you. In the next instant, a pale light emitted from the demon emperor's body and then shot out. The rage was so strong that the shock waves from it caused the other officials in the room to hide under their desks and close their eyes. As the rush of magic shot towards him, Courtiers was nothing but resigned, and so he just closed his eyes. A fearsome level of magic filled the room, and a second later, the spell to banish Courtiers from the country was complete. By the time the demon officials came out from under the table, the Flower Field Demon King, Courtiers Tart, who had ruled the South Plains and Granary, was nowhere to be seen. And it was unlikely that they would ever see Courtiers Tart again. Now that we have finally gotten rid of that extra baggage, we can talk of the bright and glorious future of the Demon Empire. The young emperor said, and the others realized that their time had finally come. And they smiled. How could they take authority from this youngster who had this power but nothing else? But They did not understand. The man who had just been banished was so important, he could have been called the very heart of demon society. Their authority and glory, they had just thrown it all away. Of course, they would not be aware of this for a while. Chapter 1. Within a secluded forest near the border between demon and human forces. It was a place that only birds and beasts ever set foot in. And now, a sudden burst of powerful energy caused it to shake. The strangeness of the sudden change in the atmosphere caused the birds to flap their wings and fly away. A rabbit could be seen hopping from a bush in panic. And then, a blue light shone from the cracks between the trees and vanished. It was finished, and the forest returned to its peaceful state. Well, except for the deep sigh and low moan that now echoed. So the time has finally come. I knew it would, but not this abruptly. It was Cooters, the man who had just been banished. Yes, I was aware that they all hated me, but a curse of eternal banishment? Even though he knew that there was no one to listen to his complaints, he couldn't help but voice them. The middle-aged man, who had been one of the great 4 kings that served the emperor a moment ago, now took off his glasses and touched his forehead as if he had a headache. The deceased previous emperor asked me to help him, but now that I'm so thoroughly hated, surely that request is invalid. He said this in an attempt to prove his innocence, but no one answered. He was the only one that was here. It was just his conscience. Oh, I'm sure it's fine now. He picked me up when I had nowhere to go, but now my debt is paid. He was saying all of this to himself, because somewhere deep in his heart, he could not bear to think that he had broken his promise to the previous emperor. In spite of having the title of Demon King, he himself was rather good-natured, though he also knew to be careful as a demon. Besides, now that I think of it, I didn't just owe him a debt. I have grievances against him as well. Yes, I remember it well, that sea of work that erased my youth. Cooters remembered his bitter past and sighed. After all, everyone who had ever worked for Cooters had despised him so much they refused to return to work. They would use their family influence to be transferred without showing their faces even once, or they would quit. Due to this, his workload in supplying the entire country with food was beyond what one could imagine. It was unbelievable that his efforts alone had been enough to keep things running for over 400 years. Not only that, even if his work environment had been decent, Cooters had never really known what it was like to be popular with the ladies. That was the final reality that Cooters was faced with as he thought back, and his shoulders slumped with disappointment. And then several minutes passed. While he seemed quite depressed, he suddenly squeezed his hands into fists, corrected his glasses, and raised his sharp eyes to the sky. And he shouted, "No, I am not finished yet. My youth begins now. Yes! Thankfully, I do not look different from the humans, and if I can blend into their world, I will be able to drown in sweet, sorrowful love. Ah, how wonderful! What a beautiful future!" Just like his attribute, his head was also a flower field. He had been pressed down by a tragic working situation up until now, but there was no longer anything to get in the way of his flower field of a brain. He was now out of control. If there is one thing I worry about, it is who will take care of my livestock. Well, they should be fine on their own. Ah, yes, the curse that the previous emperor cast upon me has been broken. I'm free. In spite of such cheerful words, there was a tear in his eye. The narrow streaks of sunlight through the trees reflected on it as it traveled down his cheek and fell. Damn it! I knew this would happen one day, and yet I look as if I wasn't prepared. He chuckled to himself, but it did little to heal the wound. It seemed that only time would do that. Ah, that's right. I can stew in my emotions some other time. Right now, what I need to do is... No, wait, where am I? Cooters said to himself as he looked at his surroundings. According to the Demon Emperor, it should not be within the Demon Empire. but that was the only information he had. Had he the wind or earth attributes, he would have been able to find out by using magic. Unfortunately, his attribute was Flower Field. No matter how much influence his magic had on the Empire, there were things it just couldn't do. I don't see any signs of human life nearby. Could this mean I'm to build a life for myself from scratch? Of course, it would be so much easier if there was a town in the area. First, I must do something about food, though that should be easy enough. Coutiers muttered to himself as he pointed to a nearby bush. Floration! In an instant, the bush seemed to turn white. This was because the white flowers had bloomed in the blink of an eye. The bush was really a gathering of many different kinds of plants, but the flowers were all the same. Fruit! But when the second spell was cast, the flowers all died, and then numerous green fruits appeared in their place. These fruits grew as if they were balloons being blown into. After a while, they started to turn red. They turned into ripe apples. There were large apples growing on the grass and shrubs. Had there been any other intelligent life watching besides coutiers, they would have pinched their cheeks at how strange the sight was. There were other spells that allowed you to accelerate the rate that plants grew, but you were limited by the original framework of the plant. However, this phenomenon ignored all of that. It was as if numerous rabbits were growing out of a human face instead of hair. In other words, it made no sense at all. Someone who researched such eerie arts would be considered either a genius or a madman. Perhaps I made them too fast, because the taste is a bit weak. Yes, it's better to take your time when making fruits. Coutiers muttered unhappily after taking a bite of the apple. In spite of just performing a miracle, there was not a speck of satisfaction on his face. This was because the flower field attribute was an attribute that allowed him to twist reality and make the flower that he wanted bloom on whatever thing or whatever place he wanted. In other words, what he had just done was very basic to him. The two together, his personality and their prejudices, had made the demons around him blind to it, but his abilities were, in fact, more than enough to make him worthy of his former position. His attribute was actually nightmarishly frightening, and yet it had been given the name Flowerfield by none other than the culprit who had raised Coutiers to be a good-natured and humble person, the previous emperor. That dead man really was just a horrible trickster.